In 1918, a secret society in Munich claimed they could summon the will of ancient Aryan gods, and a young Adolf Hitler was listening. Most historians will tell you the Nazi Party rose purely on economic despair and nationalist fervor. You'll read about the Treaty of Versailles, hyperinflation, resentment. Those factors were real. I've read enough primary sources to know the depth of that humiliation. But here's what gets buried. The intellectual architecture that made ordinary people willing to believe extraordinary cruelty was acceptable came from somewhere darker. It came from a room full of aristocrats, mystics, and ex-soldiers in Bavaria who believed they were tapping into ancient cosmic forces. The Thule Society was founded in 1918 by Rudolf von Sebottendorff, a man whose biography reads like fiction: soldier, adventurer, occultist, and self-proclaimed expert in Tibetan mysticism. He gathered perhaps 200 members, mostly wealthy Munich businessmen, right-wing intellectuals, and disillusioned military officers. On the surface, they discussed politics and business. Below that surface, and I mean this literally, in their private lodge meetings, they discussed what they believed was the secret history of the Aryan race. The accepted story goes like this. The Thule Society was just a right-wing political club. Occultism was window dressing, a quirky detail. The real power came from money and connections. Sebottendorff and his friends funded newspapers, sponsored politicians, and built networks. That's the version in most textbooks. It's also the version that lets us sleep at night, because it suggests ideology was purely rational, a calculated grab for power dressed in pseudo-philosophy. But I've read Sebottendorff's own writings, his later memoir, his correspondence, and I've studied the documented meeting notes from members who were there. What emerges is messier and more disturbing. These men genuinely believed they were custodians of forbidden knowledge. They spoke in earnest about Aryan origins in Atlantis, about mystical bloodlines, about astrology determining national destiny. This wasn't cynical manipulation, it was sincere delusion. Now here's where it gets specific. The Thule Society didn't invent Nazi ideology, but they created the intellectual permission structure for it. They published pamphlets linking Jewish people to international conspiracies, not as political opponents, but as cosmic enemies. They framed racial hierarchy not as preference, but as natural law encoded in mystical texts. They gave educated, respectable men a way to believe terrible things without admitting they were choosing cruelty. The connection between Thule and Hitler himself is where the narrative usually fractures. You'll find claims that Hitler attended meetings. He didn't, not as far as evidence shows. You'll find suggestions that Thule directly ordered him to power. That's conspiracy thinking, not history. But what is documented is this. Hitler's early supporters, his first donors, his initial intellectual circle in Munich, overlapped significantly with Thule's membership. The soil was prepared before the seed arrived. One name matters here: Dietrich Eckart, a Thule member, a poet, an occultist who believed in Aryan mysticism. He became Hitler's mentor in the early 1920s. Eckart didn't teach Hitler about occultism. Hitler was never interested in that part. What Eckart did was teach him how to speak to people who were, how to use mythological language, how to frame political goals in cosmic terms. When Hitler later spoke of destiny, of blood and soil, of a 1,000-year Reich, these weren't random metaphors. They were the vocabulary Thule had normalized. Here's what dismantles the just a political club story. The Thule Society's actual meeting records, when you find them, read nothing like a businessman's association. They discuss numerology. They debate whether ancient Tibetan texts predicted Aryan racial destiny. They argue about whether German blood carried mystical properties. These aren't asides to real business. This was the business. This was what they believed made their political work legitimate. The real explanation, the one that matters, is this. The Thule Society didn't cause Nazism through direct command or conspiracy. They did something quieter and more effective. They created a language, a permission structure, a set of myths that made racial ideology feel like ancient truth rather than modern invention. They gave respectable people a way to believe in racial hierarchy as cosmic law. They transformed political hatred into metaphysical necessity. Sebottendorff himself saw what he'd helped create. By the 1930s, as the Nazi regime solidified, he realized they'd abandoned the mysticism entirely. They kept the vocabulary, the myths, the racial ideology, but stripped away any actual spiritual content. It became pure power. He wrote later, with evident bitterness, that the Nazis had stolen Thule's ideas and perverted them. He was both right and wrong. They'd taken the permission structure and weaponized it. The implication is what keeps me awake. This wasn't mysticism causing fascism. It was educated men using mysticism as cover for ideology they wanted to believe. The occultism was never the engine, it was the justification. And that's terrifying, because it means it could happen again. Not with swastikas and talk of Atlantis, but with whatever language makes cruelty sound like cosmic necessity. The Thule Society itself dissolved around 1925, its members scattered or absorbed into Nazi structures. But the architecture they built, the marriage of myth and politics, the transformation of ideology into cosmic truth, that survived. It became the blueprint. Understanding how a secret society of well-meaning mystics accidentally created the intellectual foundation for genocide isn't just history. It's a warning about how easily language can become a weapon, and how ideology becomes most dangerous when it stops sounding like opinion and starts sounding like truth. Subscribe. Every week we uncover how history's most dangerous movements didn't announce themselves as evil, they sounded like salvation.